And welcome to a look at a 4D sports boxing for the Amiga, a game that was originally made for the PC and then converted to the Amiga. And you can tell, but more about that later. In a 4D sports boxing, the main event is that you start as a low-ranking boxer and try to work your way up through the ranks by defeating other boxers. To that end, we need to create a boxer, and for that purpose I am going to be naming this boxer something very, very unique and special. And yeah, you know, when you are trying to be funky, funny, without actually ever being it, but we'll get there. Once you create your name your boxer, you can set various different stats, and while you can mix and match as you see fit, you probably want to go for a somewhat balanced boxer setup. It could be tempting to just max one stat completely, but it will probably work for a handful of fights, but then you'll start running into problems. Personally, I like going for a completely balanced boxer, but it is completely up to the individual. You have various different options for setting height and weight and all that stuff as well. And taller boxers have longer reach, so you can actually game the game by making your boxer extremely tall to give you an edge. But I try to be as close to my own statistics. You have the various different heads you can choose from, and jersey and shirt colors, but a jersey and what's it called? Pants colors. But I spent far too much time messing about with that, so I just cut it out. The concept of a 4D sports, because there is another game in the series that I may or may not cover, depends. Obviously it is a 3D like a game, as you can probably imagine, or you can probably see for yourself as well. And the fourth D is supposed to be the camera controls. You can set up a billion different camera angles, not slightly exaggerated, but not by much, and run the replay in 10 different ways, backwards and forwards and up and down and left and right and whatever. And ultimately, while it is an added dimension to the game, you could argue that it's very, very gimmicky because it doesn't add anything to the gameplay. More often than not, personally, I find that messing about with the different camera angles actually make the gameplay experience less enjoyable. But that is a personal opinion, and you don't have to agree with me, but I think the fourth dimension in this game is too gimmicky for my liking. But anyway, we get to choose an opponent, and before every match or fight, if you want, you get to do some training. And again, you can mix and match your training as you see fit. I, as I stated earlier, like to go for a balanced setup. So now we get this little funky introduction warming up thing. And of course, we need a proper presentation. By the way, in the opponent selection, all the opponents marked with a star you can choose to fight against, and while you can select higher ranked boxers and go through the ranks very, very quickly, experience taught me the hard way that going through as many fights as possible is good because it gives you more chances to train. Early on in the game is extremely deceptive because it is almost borderline silly easy. And then as you progress through the different fights, the opponents, of course, will start getting more and more challenging. And around rank 10, there's a massive power spike in difficulty. You will find that the opponents will be able to remove a good portion of your stamina with a single hit, which gets rather frustrating because, of course, you don't have a similar ability, and that is an obnoxious way to make the game more challenging. For the purpose of this video, I want to showcase a few things. The lowest graphical setting and the highest. We've just been at the highest when the pants are filled with no stripes, and this is the lowest setting. Because the game description clearly states that this game supports accelerator or faster processors if you want, but it doesn't require it. In my opinion, that statement is a bit the same as saying that a car doesn't require an engine to move. It can move without the engine, but it's going to be slow going, and that is also the case for this game. The first match, which is going to be edited, is being showcased on a humble 7 MHz chip, and with the highest graphical setting, it's a bit sluggish. As you can see, the graphics is polygon-based 3D, and apparently it is very, very complicated and very, very harsh for the poor Amiga to handle, and that is what I was referring to when I said about it being a PC conversion. In all honesty, the amount of graphics on screen, in my opinion, does not justify the game being as sluggish as it is on an Amiga 500. To be honest, it's a bit... yeah, it doesn't feel right, put it that way. But just showcasing a few of the different camera angles you can choose from. I will be showcasing other clips with a somewhat higher processing speed, so you can get a feel for what the game actually requires. The boxing itself, as a boxing game, I would say that for these sports boxing is probably one of the better, if not, I wouldn't necessarily, it's hard to say whether it's the best Amiga boxing game, but it's definitely, from a boxing game point of view, a very, very competent game. Just going to the lowest detail setting for the boxers in hope of getting some smoother gameplay. It works, but it doesn't look particularly exciting. Fighting games is one of those kind of games where the graphics can add an awful lot to them, and it is also the case of this game, and reducing the graphics level to Stickman is not doing wonders for how it looks. Regardless, as I was saying before, the boxing itself is quite competent. You have straights, you have hooks, you have uppercuts, body shots, and all that kind of stuff. The controls are a bit odd to get used to because pressing up will always be forward, irrelevant of how you're facing, and down will always be back, irrelevant of how you're facing. Turning means that you are rotating in relation to your opponent. So if you are turning right and he's in front of you, you will be skidding or sliding right more than moving right. And once you get used to it, it's not so bad, but it can feel a bit wonky, especially if you are heavily involved in just spamming your punches in order to flatten your opponent.
5, 6, 7, 8.
You can also duck and weave and all that good stuff, but to be honest, the game, because of the amount of stamina your opponents have, even at lower ranks, or yeah, well, higher ranks, I should say, Yeah, lower, whatever.
2,
Numbers, difficult.
3, 4,
It encourages you to just go out and flail away.
9,
It will not be unsurprising to have a round where you have sent off 150, 200 punches and landed 70% of them on your opponent still standing. And while it, from an action point of view, I suppose, is somewhat rewarding, it also feels a bit odd. I'm not saying that's not the case and not possible in a real boxing match, but it just feels like you're just hammering your opponent time and time again in order to take them down. And of course, when you have the opponents being super, super keen on getting away from you and being able to get away from you, it sometimes feels like it's just a drawn out slug matches and nothing else. We had a smash victory. I quite like that little replay you get, but after this showcase, let's move to something slightly faster. Amiga 1200 equivalent, 14 MHz, just to see how that plays out. Bear in mind that the game did state that a faster processor wasn't required. We are now running at 14 MHz, and you will notice, even from the presentation, that things are still not quite good. It's definitely better, but still not where it should be, where I think or feel it should be. The graphics, it is what it is when it comes to polygon based 3D. It never looks amazing, but it never looks necessarily horrible either. And I think it could look sharper, definitely, but it is what it is. It's not super bad. The sound effects are satisfying and rewarding, and the callouts and presentation. It's not an awful lot of speech, but it adds to the feeling of being part of a boxing match. The satisfaction of flooring an opponent, of course. I mean, it is boxing, and you want to win as many matches as you can on knockout because that's the most rewarding. And it does feel rewarding. Make no mistake about that. The gameplay, well, it's boxing. If you are not into boxing, then this game would give you nothing. And if you love boxing, this game could give you an awful lot. As long as you're prepared for the fact that you will spend an awful lot of time chasing your opponent, and even if you corner your opponent, which of course is one of the most dangerous situations to be in a boxing match, they will always find a way out. Some of them will have an awful lot of stamina, which means that you can knock them absolutely senseless, but then they manage to pull away and you are trying to catch up, and because they got that very, very high stamina, they will fully recover in a very short amount of time, and it can be agitating when you can't finish off a match.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
As I was saying earlier concerning the difficulty, the first 10, 15 matches you will probably win relatively easily even if it's on points. You will not necessarily be able to knock out every opponent, and some of them, there is a few tricky opponents if you go through the list from bottom to top. And by tricky, I mean that they can do an awful lot of damage to you, or they can hurt you a lot, whatever you call it. And you can run into a surprise knockdown that you may not have anticipated because the stats didn't necessarily indicate it would be the case. And especially when you get into top 10, that's, as I said earlier, that's where the difficulty gets a massive power spike, and you can't just flail away anymore. You have to calculate and avoid hits and try to hit and all that good stuff, like you would expect from a boxing match. But ultimately, this is a game, and the game has to be exciting, and I wouldn't say the opponents have access to one-shot mechanics, but it can feel a bit like it. Running at 50 megahertz, and the game doesn't necessarily run faster as such. The pace is dictated by the stats of the boxes, and we are still quite wimpy overall, so things are not moving so fast, but it's moving an awful lot smoother. But is the amount of graphics on screen justifiable for 50 megahertz? I don't think so. And not at all. I know a programming expert. I wouldn't make claims that the code has been ported straight up, and the Amiga is basically having to chunk through translating the code or working around the code or whatever. But if you look at other 3D games which has a ton more graphics, not all of them obviously. I mean, it all depends on how they've been programmed, but there are definitely 3D games on the Amiga with tons more graphics being worked on, which also has some sort of AI that needs calculations, which move infinitely faster than this game. It's not bad for what it is, but in all honesty, I think that this game should never have been released with the requirement of a basic Amiga 500, because it is not unplayable, but if you have to turn the graphics down to the point where you are playing with stickmen, you lose so much of what makes a fighting game exciting. I know I say that graphics and sound doesn't make for a game, but when it comes to fighting games, I would argue that graphics and sound does make for quite a large part of the gaming experience, and it is obtainable, but it's not necessarily easily obtainable. And yeah, I'm not overly impressed by it. I would say if the option is available and you're keen on trying out this game, like the PC version, it pains me to say it, but the PC version plays faster and smoother on a much lower rated system. So on that note, thanks for watching, take care, see you next time, bye bye for now.